Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like on this video, and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let's get into the story. Ethan Wallace was 27 years old when he disappeared into the Amazon rainforest, leaving behind only fragments of a journal that seemed to tell the story of a man who crossed a line no outsider was ever meant to cross. His name is now whispered in hostels, his case cited in documentaries, his fate debated by anthropologists and adventurers alike. To understand how it happened, you have to begin far from the jungle, in the quiet streets of Brighton, England, where Ethan was born. From childhood, he had been different. While other children traded football cards and obsessed over games, Ethan spent his afternoons poring over maps. His walls were covered with them, taped up until there was no wallpaper left to see. With colored pencils, he traced rivers and mountain ranges, inventing routes across continents. His father, a history teacher, encouraged this obsession, buying him books about explorers like Percy Fawcett and David Livingstone. His mother, a nurse, watched with concern. She saw her son turning warnings into invitations. "Adventure sounds beautiful on paper," she told him once. "It's dangerous when you try to live inside it." Ethan only smiled. By the time he was a teenager, he was restless, never content with the safe rhythm of school. His essays dwelled on rituals, uncontacted tribes, forgotten languages. He spoke about cultures as if they were living myths. His sister, Natalie, later said, "It was obvious we'd lose him to travel. He was never going to stay." At university, he studied anthropology, but professors noticed he wasn't made for academic life. He wanted fieldwork, mud on his boots, notebooks full of sketches. After graduation, he refused the 9-to-5 jobs his friends took. Instead, he worked shifts at pubs, delivered parcels, and saved every pound for his next trip. By 27, he had already traveled more than most do in a lifetime. He had crossed the Trans-Siberian Railway in winter, lived in hostels across Eastern Europe, wandered India's rural villages, trekked across Southeast Asia. Everywhere he went, he wrote. His blog, Walking Without Roads, gathered a small but loyal audience. He didn't describe luxury hotels or tourist attractions. He described the ache of walking all day, the small kindness of strangers, the way silence feels in a village where no one speaks your language. Readers admired his honesty. He seemed to be searching not for places, but for something older, more essential. South America was the journey he had been saving. He called it his masterpiece. "Europe is history," he wrote to a friend. "Asia is momentum. South America is myth. The Amazon is the last place that can still look at you and say, 'You don't belong here.'" He postponed it for years, waiting until he felt ready. In May 2012, he finally bought his one-way ticket to Lima. To his mother, he said, "I know what I'm doing, don't worry." To his sister, he joked, "If I don't come back, maybe my notebook will." Lima was only a pause. After 3 days, he booked a flight to Iquitos, the world's largest city unreachable by road. From the air, he saw the jungle stretching endlessly, a green ocean cut by a serpentine river. He pressed his forehead to the window, eyes wide. Iquitos felt impossible. Motorbikes snarled through crowded streets, neon signs blinked in the thick air, and markets overflowed with fruit in colors he'd never imagined. He wrote in his journal, "This city shouldn't exist. It's a neon island carved out of the jungle, buzzing and fragile, surrounded by silence that waits." At his hostel, painted yellow and sagging with humidity, other travelers remembered him as charming but unusually intense. A German backpacker later said, "He asked about tribes, not the tourist ones, the real ones. He asked if sacrifices still happened. We laughed. He didn't." Ethan spent his nights listening to stories in hammocks, scribbling in his notebook, filling pages with descriptions of faces, streets, smells. In the market, he bought supplies, dried fish, bananas, bottled water, waterproof matches, iodine tablets, rope, and a machete. He handled the blade with quiet reverence. Most important of all was his journal, sealed in a heavy plastic bag. He told a fellow traveler, "If anything happens, at least this might survive me." At the docks, he asked about boats heading upriver. That was when he met Julio, a fisherman with a scar down his arm. Julio later recalled, he asked about the Silent Zone. Not many outsiders know that name. I told him, don't go, hunters don't enter, birds don't sing, people vanish. That land belongs to others. Ethan only smiled, wrote something in his notebook, and nodded. Julio said it looked as if the foreigner had just chosen his destination. On June 3rd, Ethan boarded a cargo boat heading upriver. The vessel was patched with rust and wood, groaning under crates of bananas, cages of chickens, and families balancing sacks of rice. The deck smelled of feathers, sweat, and fruit. Ethan sat sketching. The curve of the river, the silhouettes of trees, the faces of children who stared at him. A boy remembered Ethan giving him shoelaces to repair his broken sandals. He said, "They would last longer than mine," the boy later told police. Ethan laughed easily, shared food, and seemed alive with curiosity. No one guessed he was walking into a place locals refused to name. The boat dropped him at a small settlement of stilt houses above muddy banks. From there, he began walking inland. Villagers remembered him buying fruit, asking for directions, always polite, always smiling. But his questions unsettled them. He asked only about one thing: the path deeper, the path into the interior, the path no one wanted to describe. An old woman shook her head when he asked, muttering words in a dialect he couldn't understand. A young man avoided his eyes and simply pointed away from the river. His journal from June 4th begins with awe. The forest is infinite. Trees taller than cathedrals, roots like walls. The air clings to the skin, every sound alive. Monkeys screaming, birds shrieking, insects buzzing like electricity. The jungle doesn't whisper, it sings. He sketched bright birds, insects with wings like stained glass, trees that leaned together above him as if closing him inside a green cathedral. By afternoon, unease had entered the pages. Carvings on trunks, circles with lines. Painted in red, still wet, too deliberate to be random. Territory markers? Warnings? I feel watched. That night his handwriting shrank. Woke to flutes, thought it was wind. Too steady. Then drums. Low, rhythmic. The forest held its breath. I couldn't see them, but someone was there. June 5th grew darker. Heat unbearable. Insects relentless. Sweat burning into eyes. Shadows moving. Too tall, too fast for animals. I feel followed. Found stones half buried with carvings. Spirals. Eyes. Lines I can't read. Dreamed of chanting. Woke certain someone was watching. Faces painted. Eyes unblinking. He tried to convince himself it was imagination, exhaustion, but the tension in his handwriting betrayed him. Letters leaned, ink pressed hard, words cut short. On June 6th, his entries reached a fever pitch. Found clearing, idle, at least 10 feet tall, arms stretched wide, hollow eyes, mouth open, covered in ash, smeared with stains darker than ash. Around it, bones, arranged in spirals, precise, intentional. Too clean to be animals. Teeth, human. Please let me be wrong. He drew the figure, a grotesque idol with its mouth stretched. In a silent scream, hollow eyes staring, arms raised as if welcoming or condemning. Around it, the spiral of bones radiated outward like a sun made of death. That night he wrote, "Faces in trees. Painted black and white. Silent first, then chanting. Rhythmic, endless. They watched until I ran. I don't know how long. I think they follow. The next page was smeared, words breaking mid-sentence. They surrounded me. There was no... The line ended there, torn, as if the notebook had been ripped from his hands. It was the last thing he ever wrote. When Ethan failed to arrive at his planned check-in point, his family in England grew anxious. He had promised to send at least a short message every few days, enough to prove he was alive. Days passed with nothing. His mother told herself it was poor connection, the jungle swallowing signals. But by the second week, silence turned heavy. They contacted the British Embassy, who pressed Peruvian authorities to investigate. A search team was formed. Soldiers, police, and a few reluctant villagers who knew the forest better than maps. They traced his path using accounts from boat passengers and the scraps of memory villagers carried. They found signs of his passage: a footprint near a stream, the remains of a campfire, a torn piece of cloth. For days they pushed deeper, but unease grew among them. One soldier later admitted, "The jungle felt wrong, too quiet, as if even the animals wanted us gone." It was then they found the clearing. The idol stood exactly as he had drawn it, arms wide, eyes hollow. Around it lay bones arranged in spirals. Some swore they were human, long femurs bleached white, teeth scattered like offerings. The villagers refused to step closer. They whispered prayers and turned away. One elder said, "That place is not empty. It belongs to the ones who were here before us. If you enter, you belong to them." Nearby, they found his torn backpack, its contents spilled across the mud. His watch was smashed, his clothes ripped, but his journal survived inside its waterproof bag. The final pages confirmed what they feared. He had seen faces painted black and white, he had heard chanting, he had been surrounded. But there was no body. The search went on for nearly 2 weeks, but the deeper they pushed into the forest, the more resistance they faced. Soldiers complained of sudden illness, pounding headaches, strange dreams that woke them drenched in sweat. A police officer later told reporters he had seen a figure standing at the edge of camp one night, painted in black and white, still as stone. When he raised his rifle, it was gone. He never fired a shot, but he swore he heard flutes in the darkness afterward. The villagers refused to advance any farther. They muttered prayers and left food offerings at the edge of the path, as if apologizing for trespassing. One soldier who kept a diary of the search described the moment they stumbled upon, sharpened, stakes buried in the earth, arranged in patterns that could only be traps. "They were not for animals," he wrote. "Too high, too precise. Whoever placed them knew we were coming." The team dismantled what they could, but the sense of being watched never left. Each night, torches seemed to flicker in the trees beyond camp, just out of reach, moving in slow, deliberate circles. When the team finally returned to Iquitos, they carried little more than Ethan's torn pack and the journal. Officials drafted a sterile report. The traveler had likely succumbed to natural hazards, heat exhaustion, drowning, or an animal attack. There was no mention of idols, bones, or chants in the trees. The silence was deliberate. Acknowledging anything else would demand answers no one was prepared to give. Back in England, his family received the news with disbelief. His mother refused to accept that her son could vanish so easily. She lit a candle in his room every night and kept his old maps spread across the desk, as if following the lines might draw him back. His sister, Natalie, took a different approach. She began writing letters to newspapers, pleading for international pressure, demanding a more thorough search. In one interview, she said, "They tell you not to disturb the wildlife. They should also tell you not to disturb what wants to stay hidden." The journal was eventually returned to them, but not before being copied by investigators. The pages leaked online where readers pored over his sketches of the idol, his frantic last words. Some dismissed them as delusions born of heat and exhaustion. Others saw them as proof of something darker. A secret tribe, untouched by modern contact, practicing rituals outsiders were never meant to witness. Anthropologists debated the case quietly. One, speaking off the record, admitted, "There are groups in the Amazon we know exist but cannot map. They defend their territory with violence. What Wallace may have seen was not fantasy but the old world protecting itself." Another disagreed. The spiral of bones, the chanting, he was hallucinating. Malaria, dehydration, isolation. It explains everything. Yet a third countered, "Hallucinations don't leave carvings on trees. They don't smash watches and scatter clothes." The British press devoured the story for months. Headlines branded him the lost explorer and the tourist who vanished into the jungle. Documentaries replayed the same few facts, filling silence with speculation. His friends remembered him differently. One wrote, "He wasn't reckless. He respected places. If he ignored warnings, it wasn't arrogance. It was because he believed the only way to understand people was to walk where they lived, even if it scared him." Meanwhile, in Peru, whispers spread among river villages. Some said his body had been taken for a ritual offering. Others claimed he had been adopted by the hidden tribe, living now as one of them, invisible to the outside world. Hunters reported hearing flutes at night, carried by the wind. A fisherman swore he saw a pale figure on the riverbank weeks later, watching silently before vanishing into the foliage. The government's official line remained unchanged. Ethan Wallace was missing, presumed dead, likely claimed by natural causes. But locals knew better. They had warned him. He had smiled, thanked them, and gone anyway. And the forest had taken him. The search for Ethan Wallace became a wound that refused to close. Officially, it lasted 2 weeks, but in reality, it lingered. For months, in whispers and in speculation, in articles that reappeared every time another traveler vanished in the Amazon. Soldiers who had walked the trail carried home stories they did not want to tell. One described nights when the forest went so quiet that every breath sounded like a trespass. Another admitted he had stopped sleeping because whenever he closed his eyes, he saw the idol, not in daylight but in firelight, its hollow eyes seeming to move. A police officer confided to a colleague that he woke one morning to find a spiral of stones outside his tent that hadn't been there when he fell asleep. He dismantled it without telling anyone, but afterward he swore the forest followed him home in dreams. Local guides avoided discussing the mission, but rumors spread among villages along the river. Some said the soldiers had seen figures watching from the trees and had been too afraid to pursue. Others claimed one man went missing briefly during the search, found hours later stumbling back to camp with no memory of where he had been. The official report made no mention of these accounts. It described poor weather, difficult terrain, and inconclusive evidence. It listed Ethan Wallace as missing, presumed dead. Nothing more. Back in England, his family clung to fragments. His mother reread the journal pages until the ink blurred in her tears. She kept his old maps pinned to the wall, tracing his red pencil roots with her finger, whispering his name. Natalie, his sister, turned grief into anger. She gave interviews to any outlet that would listen. "We were told nothing. They know more than they're saying. My brother didn't die because of the heat or because he was careless. Something else happened and they don't want to admit it." She campaigned for stricter travel advisories, warning young adventurers that curiosity in the wrong place could be fatal. The journal itself became a kind of artifact. Copies circulated online, photographs of his sketches, the idol, the spirals, of bones, were shared across forums, dissected in podcasts, referenced in conspiracy videos. Some called them proof of a hidden tribe still practicing human sacrifice. Others dismissed them as the fevered hallucinations of a dehydrated man. But the handwriting was undeniably his. The progression from neat, observational notes to frantic scrawls told a story no editor could invent. Journalists flew to Iquitos to interview locals. Some returned with nothing but photographs of the river. Others came back with stories darker than what had already been told. One reported being shown a tree with carvings like those Ethan described, circles cut through with lines, painted red. Another claimed a fisherman told him he had heard drums in the distance at night, steady and deliberate, not the sound of wind or water. None of it could be verified. All of it deepened the mystery. Anthropologists split into camps. One group insisted Ethan had likely encountered an uncontacted tribe defending its territory. To them, the carvings, the shadows, the chanting were signs of warning ignored. He wasn't murdered, one said. He was punished for trespass. Another group believed he had been hallucinating, his mind unraveling under the pressure of heat, isolation, and illness. They pointed out that exhaustion can produce visions, that fever can make flutes out of wind, drums out of heartbeats. A third group whispered that the truth was worse, that some groups deep in the forest still practiced rituals outsiders could not comprehend, sacrifices meant to renew a bond with forces older than history. To acknowledge that would mean admitting. The modern world did not reach everywhere. The debate spilled into the press. Headlines declared him the tourist who walked into myth, or the sacrificed explorer. Documentaries replayed the same few facts, layering them with ominous music. Talk shows speculated about cannibals, spirits, and curses. For most of the world, Ethan's story was reduced to entertainment. But for those who read every word of his journal, it was something else. A man's voice fading into silence, each page heavier than the last. Travelers began telling his story in hostels as a warning. "Don't go off the map," they'd say. "Remember Wallace." Some claimed to have visited villages near the Silent Zone where people still refused to speak of what lived deeper in the forest. A few swore they had seen the idol themselves, charred and looming, surrounded by bones. One man said he entered the clearing only long enough to snap a photograph, but when he checked his camera later, the image was blank, the file corrupted. The Peruvian government denied all of it. They issued statements blaming reckless tourism and natural hazards. But locals knew better. They told their children to stay away from the Silent Zone, to never follow the sound of flutes at night. Hunters skirted the area, refusing to step past invisible lines. The fear was not folklore, it was lived knowledge. Ethan became more than a missing person. He became a myth himself, absorbed into the story of the jungle. Some believed he had been sacrificed to keep an ancient balance. Others whispered he had been taken into the tribe, reborn under a new name, his old life abandoned. A few even suggested he had become part of the forest itself, a presence felt when the air goes still and eyes stare from the trees. For his family, the myth was no comfort. His mother still sets a place for him at Christmas. Natalie still lights a candle on June 7th, the day he was last heard from. His father no longer speaks of it at all. When pressed by a reporter, he said only, "The jungle keeps its own secrets." Years later, new travelers disappeared near the same region. Their cases were never connected officially, but locals noticed the pattern. Each had ventured too far, each had ignored warnings, each had last been seen near the boundaries of the Silent Zone. The jungle, it seemed, demanded payment for intrusion. To this day, the idol is said to stand in its clearing. The spiral of bones remains, renewed, though no one admits to arranging it. At night, when the forest falls too quiet, people say the flutes return, carrying through the trees, followed by the steady echo of drums. Whether warning or celebration, no one can say. The Amazon is more than rivers and trees. It is memory, ritual, silence that swallows intruders whole. Ethan Wallace went in search of myth and found it, but the price was his life. His words, preserved in that waterproof bag, are all that came back. They remind us that some places are not meant to be crossed, some secrets not meant to be uncovered. He wanted to witness what was hidden. In the end, he became part of it, and if you ever find yourself near the Silent Zone, When the night grows too quiet, listen carefully. You may hear the flutes, faint but insistent, calling through the darkness. You may hear the echo of drums, steady and patient. And you may remember the story of a traveler who went searching for what should never have been found and never returned.